All right. Good afternoon or good morning, whenever you're watching this, Hub subscribers. We are back with another one of our awesome interviews. We are here with the author of several of your students' favorite romances, Abigail Hing Wen. Abigail, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Justin. And hello, everyone in Missouri.
All right. And not just Missouri, because we have a nationwide and worldwide audience for this one.
Oh, that's awesome. Hello, everyone worldwide.
So one of our favorite things to do with these interviews is we always start off, since this is a blog that focuses on teen librarians, like I said, not just in the United States, but worldwide. I always like to ask my authors about your personal history with libraries, not just as a professional, not just as an author, but just as a human being that loves libraries.
Absolutely. I grew up in a library, basically. I spent so many hours in the Solon Public Library, and I just I found other worlds in books, and all my friends were in books back then. So it was really like the curation by my local library that led me to so many wonderful stories. So I loved A Wrinkle in Time and um, the Narnia books. I found those in my school library in fourth grade. Um, there were so many these like R.L. Stein mysteries in my local library. And I just remember sitting on the floor for hours and hours pouring through the books. So definitely, I feel most at home in a library at the end of the day. I remember too, like getting out all these origami books and like actually like creating all this origami, like sitting there on the floor of the library.
That's awesome. Well, now cut to the modern day and adult Abigail. I think one of the most impressive things looking over your resume before we get into talking about your books, just the sheer number of jobs that you have listed that you do currently and simultaneously. Can you take us through some of those multiple roles that you have outside of being a best-selling author and how you balance all of that?
Yeah, so I joke that if I had gotten a book deal sooner, I would have had less of this other career. But I didn't have a book deal. So for many years, I was just writing and writing while holding down a job to make ends meet. So I practiced law. I moved to the Bay Area, to follow my husband who works in tech. And I worked as a lawyer here in tech. I moved in-house into a venture capital fund where I got to work with a lot of cool startups doing the cutting edge technologies of our time. And eventually I started growing this portfolio of AI startups and moved into our AI division. So that's kind of how I like just kind of picked up all this knowledge and information. Plus, I was passionate about this area. I specifically asked, like, oh, can I work more on AI startups in particular? So all that ended up becoming fodder for a number of my books. Even the second Loveboat Taipei book, people may not realize my 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 girl Sophie Ha, she's actually a girl in tech and she creates an AI fashion app that her professors don't understand and are not interested in. So that's part of her journey. But I haven't done everything all at the same time. So I actually did finally leave my corporate job about 2.5 years ago, I think maybe 3.5 years now, when we greenlit the Love and Taipei movie. So that was the film adaptation of Loveboat Taipei. Um, and since then, I haven't looked back.
That's great. And so with writing Loveboat Taipei and the series that followed it, a lot of our viewers are going to know you primarily as a romance author. Not that, not to reduce you too much to a single genre. Just from both an author and a reader's perspective, what do you see as the value of romance? Because I know that it's extremely popular, but it's also one that sometimes people like to look down their nose at. What do you see as the value of romance for our teen readers?
I love this question. I remember talking with my friend Yang Chu, who is also she also went to Harvard with me. She was like 4 or 5 years ahead of me. And we talked about romance and how hard it is actually to write good romance. Because if you think about it, it's like words on a page that have to create chemistry between two imaginary characters. And this chemistry is actually something you're creating with the reader too, because the reader has to connect with your characters and love your characters and care about them. Otherwise, they're not interested in following along with their story. So I actually think it's really hard to create a good romance. But it is actually what people often invest in. It's very relatable. It's something that's very universal. And I've actually written books and stories without romances, and my agents come back like, no, people want to know, like they're like outside of like this mission that your hero is on. They want to know what their personal life is about, and those romantic relationships are a big part of it.
Just beyond the motivation to read, do you see kind of broader social or cultural value for our teens in reading romance beyond, like I said, it's highly motivating for them. It's one of my most popular sections of the library.
Mhm.
Um, as far as our teens and their development, what do you see as the value of the genre for them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially in a day and age when we're very digital and a lot of relationships are online. Like I think it's really important to have models of relationships. Like relationships are hard. Real world relationships are hard. And actually in some ways that is a theme of the Veil. People in the real world will disappoint you. They will misunderstand you. And it takes work, it takes effort, it takes putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. And it can be easy to want to retreat into our virtual tools the way my character Brand does. But at the end of the day, if you step out into the world, you'll find out it's really worthwhile to have those relationships. And so I think for teens to read about a wide variety of friendships and parent-child relationships and romantic relationships, all that helps to build our arsenal of how to have relationships ourselves.
That's great. Um, so Loveboat started out, you were just writing it yourself and it hadn't been sold, hadn't been requested. How did Loveboat come about and where was the impetus for this idea to start this romance series?
So it's actually based on a true story, a true experience. There is a program in Taiwan that's been around since the 1960s that I was invited to when I was a teenager. And I thought, like my character ever, that it was to learn language and culture. And so I showed up, and lo and behold, it's actually Love Boat. And so that's the story of the book as well as the movie. And it was just such a bizarre experience of these Asian American kids dropped off in a foreign country for the first time in their lives without parental supervision. And they're basically going crazy in the best of ways, sneaking out clubbing and drinking snake blood sake, which is only for tourists, but also really learning language and culture and reconnecting with their heritage in a way that is all their own. And so it was such a weird story that no one knew about outside of our community that I wanted to tell it, and that became the book and series. But I will say it was my fifth novel that I wrote, my first to be published. And the last book, sorry, it was my sixth novel. The last book I buried right before Loveboat Taipei came out in the world was The Veil. So I'm really thrilled that The Veil is now coming out 10 years later.
Oh, that's great. Um, So one of the things that's really striking about Love Boat and the rest of the series, I think you strike a really strong balance between exploring that Chinese American identity and Chinese culture, but at the same time making it very relatable and universal for anyone who's experienced kind of the high expectations from families. Was that a goal going into it, or is that something that you discovered in the writing process?
I think I was surprised at how much the story connected across cultures. So my editor at HarperCollins, Kristen Pettit, she's Italian American, and I remember her telling me Ever's family is exactly like my family, and I think that's partly what's been true. Like the book has now been translated into 12 languages, with more coming, and I think that has been like the most exciting part. What I've learned in that is the more specific our stories, the more universal and relatable they become. And I think that's because at the end of the day, people are people.
Well, and going back to like what you said about models of relationships, there's a lot in, like you said, getting specific with Chinese and Chinese American culture. There's a lot of cultural expectations and relationships that you took aim at in Love Boat Taipei. I'm thinking about Sophie's experience with domestic abuse and some of the like semi-forced marriages. Did you take any heat or take any blowback for those?
Interesting. That's a really great question. I did have some people question whether domestic violence belonged in a rom-com. Because like, oh, it's a happy story. Like maybe that doesn't fit. Won't that take readers out of the story? And I think I was surprised by that. I think that it's coming from a position of privilege. It's not that we can't have happy, normal lives, but also there's someone down the hall from us or our roommate who is experiencing domestic violence. I think it's all part of it. It doesn't mean that we can't have a happy story. It's just a recognition of like that's the reality that we live in. So there was a little bit of that. But I also loved how Sophie Ha's story of like a family that their greatest expectation for her was to marry well was a really great counterpoint to Ever's family, whose expectations for her was to become a doctor. And just it actually allowed her to appreciate their expectations for her when she understood the roommate's expectations. And so I think having that balance, like that's something I try to do with all my works, is to have multiple voices and multiple viewpoints and multiple experiences. So there's not just any one narrative.
And That actually leads into something else that I really appreciate about this series. You mentioned, Sophie giving a lot of depth to Ever's story. It feels like just about everything in these books is kind of a Chekhov's gun. Like everything calls back, everything ties together. Do you meticulously beforehand plan that out, or is it as you're drafting, you're like, oh, I remember I had Ever take this picture. Let's bring that back in. Is that organic or is that meticulously crafted?
It's very much organic. Yeah, I have ideas all day long, and it used to be that they all went into one book, and now I know to parcel them out into different books. But those ideas, they're all jumbled up, and part of the exercise in writing a novel is putting them in the right order. And then after I put them in the right order, I will start to make these other connections. So one of my favorite ones is I was chatting with my friend Stacey Lee, who's also an author, about Ever's relationship with Rick in Loveboat, and she's like, well, Ever was really angry with Rick because he's boy wonder and he was always held up as the standard for Ever. And Stacey's like, what if like she had written a note to Rick and he never responded? And I'm like, oh, I love that idea. So that idea went into the book where part of Ever's grudge against Rick is her parents forced her to write him a letter when she was 12, a fan letter basically, and he never responded. And so I liked that. And then as I was writing the book and kind of just massaging it, I realized, oh, they should address this at some point. And so that became a really cool full circle moment where he actually writes back to her because she confronts him about it. He's like, I didn't even know, I never got the letter. And so then at the end, when he's like courting her, he writes back to her. He's like, sorry, this is now like, 6 years later, but here it is.
Um, with the rest of the books in the series, um, what was the thinking behind instead of doing kind of true sequels, a lot of following the other characters instead of following Ever, you're following Sophie. Instead of following Sophie again, now you're following Pearl.
Hmm.
Where was the impetus for that idea?
I think part of that was Ever's arc felt finished for the most part after book one. And really, book two came about because I had too much story from my original book one. It was 120,000 words, 5 points of view from all the main characters, Ever, Rick, Sophie, Xavier, and also some from Jenna, Rick's ex-girlfriend. And so it became all that extra work became book two automatically. So I had a two-book deal out the gates, and book two was going to be Xavier, but my editor was like, well, we really need a girl's perspective as well. And then I realized Sophie also had this really rich story that still hadn't been told yet. So that's what ended up with being book two. But then their story also felt complete after the end of book two. And so I'd had fans mentioning that they would actually love to hear Pearl's story. And so that kind of gave me the idea for like following 6 years later with Ever's little sister so we could actually see how much everyone had changed. And even for Pearl, like in some ways, like her relationship with her parents is very different than Ever's being the younger child. And so that allowed me to show again that different side of the same coin.
And so, as you've mentioned, this has been adapted into film, first on Paramount Plus, now on Netflix. Love in Taipei. How did that come about? Was that always in the works, or was it a product of this series striking the chord with so many readers?
Yeah, well, I think so. The book before the Veil, which was buried, never saw the light of day. I had people talking about film interest for that one, but we couldn't place it. It was before Crazy Rich Asians and Hamilton, so it didn't even publish. And so I think that's when I first got bitten by the bug. And then with Love in Taipei, as I was writing it, a lot of people said, "Oh, this could totally be a movie." So from the beginning, like when I went out to agents, we had overnight reads. People were offered very quickly, and they were all talking about movie rights. So from there, like I chose an agent who I love and who had actually read my very first novel, like at this point, it's like 15 years ago. Um, and so we thought about like which would be the right publisher to really help us get all the way to the screen. And we chose HarperCollins after an auction, not only because they paid top dollar, but because we really felt that they had the marketing commitment behind the book to get it out there in a big way. So it all really starts with the book, and the book ended up being on the bestseller list for multiple weeks. But even before we hit the bestseller list, I was talking with Hollywood and I was talking with producers, and we were making decisions about, again, who do we feel would give it its best shot at getting to the screen.
And with so much of this, I mean, it was a very long novel, and condensing that down to about 9,500 minutes. How did what was that process like? Because I know that you were an executive producer, so you had a lot of creative control over what stayed in, what got cut. What was your thought process on taking this long labor of love and shrinking it down to feature length?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm just so thankful for all the creative talents that lent of their abilities to this story and adapting it. It was my very first movie, so I think I was very careful, like just to just let other people move forward with it. I spoke a lot with the screenwriter as he was writing the script, and I commented on every draft. But 300 people make a movie and all of them leave their own creative stamp on it. So, um, you know, the, my fans have noticed like the movie ends in a different place than the book. And initially they were, there's some fans who are quite upset about it. And what I let them know is like think of it as like the movie gets to showcase the kinetic energy of dance and the beauty of Taipei, the city. The book you can go deeper into the character's psyche. And then the romance arc in the movie ends at the midpoint of the novel, and the story continues in the first novel, second novel, and third novel. So you can get the full package by reading the books and watching the film.
That's great. So moving out of Taipei, then your follow-up, your first published novel outside of the series, Kisses, Codes, and Conspiracies, um, ties into a lot of that scientific tech background that you had been talking about that you revisited with Loveboat Reunion. Tell us a little bit about that one that just came out last summer.
Yeah, and I see that the short story that started it all is behind you, Serendipity. So that's where it began. I wrote a short story about Tan Lee and Winter Wu. They have an unusual living situation where his family has rented out the back rooms of their home in Palo Alto to her widowed mother and in winter so she could go to school in Palo Alto, which is the best public schools in the California area. Um, and there's like a love triangle with the girl he's dating from Shanghai and Winter and his little sister. And my editor at Macmillan loved the short story so much, she asked me to write a follow-on novel so we could follow the characters further. So that became Kisses, Codes, Conspiracies. It was supposed to be a babysitter story, and it is. At the heart, they're still like they're babysitting their kid when the door gets banged down by these thugs that are chasing his ex-girlfriend who's come to him for help, and it sets the three of them on a run throughout the Bay Area. I had a lot of fun writing that one because it was a lot closer to home, and I got to feature all like my favorite places in the Bay Area.
That's great. I apologize. Keep muting because they're vacuuming outside of my library.
No, I can't hear it. Don't worry.
Have your Love Boat stands embraced Kisses, Codes, and Conspiracies as much as they embraced Ever and her crew?
Yeah, it's hard to tell because the movie is out, so there's like people discovering the Love Boat series. The hardest part, to be honest, is getting word out on the books. Like most people, I constantly still hear from people, oh, we didn't even know there's a second Love Boat book, let alone a third Love Boat, let alone a new standalone that's come out. So I think that's really the hardest part. It's just getting word out. But my readers who've read Kisses, Codes, and Conspiracies, some of them tell me they love it even more than Love Boat. And I think that is definitely my hope for all of my works is that each of them gets progressively better. But I also think my works are so different that each of them will find their own audiences.
Well, and getting into, finding a unique audience, you are getting ready to make your middle grade debut now, writing for a younger crew than a lot of our viewers work with, but some of us are public librarians, so we do have that audience, and it's behind your head. We have The Vale, and I believe as of this recording, it is coming out in a few weeks, correct?
Comes out September 16th.
September. Okay. So this originates with your work and your research into AI. Tell us a little bit about the Veil and how that ties into your work with AI.
Yeah, so the Vale features 13-year-old Bran Lee. His parents are inventors, and they've created this virtual reality fantasy world that he's been building using AI generation tools. And I actually wrote it 10 years ago, as I mentioned. It was too early to publish it, so I ended up shelving it, never went out to publishers, it just never saw the light of day. And now that everyone knows what AI generation is, this is kind of what I wanted. Like this now is the time to publish it. And what I'm really excited about is not only is there this story, a family-centric story about this family that's fallen on hard times and how their invention is the one that will save the day for them. Um, but it's also a way to equip our young readers and the young at heart on how does this technology really work. And so here, like for me, being accurate is really important. And so I drew on all my experience working with AI technologies and startups to write the story. And so you, as a reader, you will understand intuitively this is how AI generation works. It pulls ideas from all these things that have trained it, and it comes out in like a different funky way, right? And that is the world of the Veil. There's these Easter eggs that readers can find of like the Brothers Grimm stories, the magic paintbrush, which is this concept of everything you paint comes to life. And and then there's this relationship with this adorable elf that is actually in some ways a proxy for the brother that Bran never had. And that's a journey he needs to go through.
And as you mentioned before, relationships are so central to your writing, not just the romantic ones, but the familial relationships, the friendships. Um, what was it like digging into sort of a very non-traditional relationship compared to, Ever and her parents or Ever and her friends? Now it's your protagonist and a complete fabrication of AI. How did that compare to your previous relational writing?
Yeah, so that was a fun challenge because, it was a balance between like like he does love this world. It's his own creation. And that's true, I think, for any artist. Like you love the creations that you make. So Brand has created Vale. Brand's created the Vale, he's created Nomley. His family has been involved in this creation and he's trained him for 7 years. And Nomley himself is coming to life. And so there was a balance between that, like creating this like immersive, lovable world, with this need for Bran to eventually live in the real world. And so even now, as I'm writing the script, I'm adapting the script as part of a program in Los Angeles. I have to balance like Bran's relationship with Nomley and Bran's relationship with Piper, who is a girl in the real world, who is in many ways his equal. Like she's brilliant, she can solve 4x4 Rubik's cubes, and she's a hacker. So yeah, I think. I, those human relationships are really important, but the story world of the Vale is also important to Bran, and eventually it gets its own little journey too.
That's great. And you mentioned a script. There was a short film prequel that you directed. Are we getting now a longer form film treatment as The Veil comes out in print form?
Well, we are definitely working on it. The short film is the first step towards it. So as you know, it stars my girlhood hero Lea Salonga, who was the voice of Jasmine and Mulan in the Disney films, and Miss Saigon on Broadway. So it was just a thrill to work with her as in my directorial debut. And then we had this fabulous group of animation folks, and we're going to start sharing the screening. So folks sign up for my newsletter. They can find out more about the screenings that are happening around the country. And hopefully, if I am in a city near you, you can come by and say hi in person.
And we'll definitely link that on the blog post. So I'm getting the sense that Ever's love of Mulan was a tribute to your childhood hero then.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, So something that we focus on in some of these interviews, and it's just an unfortunate fact of living in 2025, we have to address when authors see their works get banned, challenged, confronted by community groups. Have you had that experience with your works so far?
I actually have been fortunate not to, and I don't know, like why, because I think I have things that are probably just as controversial. It could also, I mean, one thing that is really important to me is that all my characters speak their points of view. And so maybe that's part of why that's been the case. Like, there's no denying that there's a diversity of people in our worlds, and that's how I write my books. There's a diversity of characters in these worlds, and each of them has their own point of view. So I really don't know. I don't think it's I understand why. I think what happens is like you don't parents who aren't like aware of what their kids are reading can get scared when they find out, oh, there's something I didn't know about. And sometimes it's like I know I'm a parent myself. I feel like that feeling like, oh, am I protecting my child enough? I think we always like no one will ever feel like we've done parenting right. But I think banning books out of a place of like fear and misunderstanding is really harmful to these kids that need these books, that desperately need these books. And I think I'm really thankful for the librarians that are fighting to because they read these books. They see the kids who's for whom these books will save their lives. And I'm really thankful to the work the librarians are doing around the country.
And as I was writing that question down, getting ready for today, the thing that popped into my mind that I was really curious about and how it was received, towards the end of the first Love Boat, when they're on the big field trip at the end, it's a
Mhm.
scene sort of reminiscent of of the Scars scene in Jaws, where they're going around the table and they're sharing their experiences with anti-Chinese racism.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and that's not the only discussion of that type of racism in your works. Has that ever been not just challenged, but how has that been received in the broader public, as far as you know?
Yeah, so I know I've had people who've experienced that feel thankful that it's there. They feel really seen, like, oh yeah, that was my experience, and now like it's being shared. And again, maybe it goes back to like the book is not a book about racism, but it's part of our life. Just the way like Sophie Ha experienced domestic violence, it's not the entire story. It's like a small piece of this 400-page novel, but it's there. And same with the racism, it's also there. And there's also people who are not racist who are there. And I think again, it's that fuller picture, that balance of this experience. Like, again, like maybe that's why it's at least for these books, there hasn't been an issue with it being challenged. I think most people can't deny it happens. So that maybe again, I don't really know, and I am thankful, but I'm also aware that there's so much work to be done.
Well, especially with the first book coming out so close to COVID, when a lot of those sentiments really exploded. Um, but we had our kids at home that had the access to an exploration of that in a safe format.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, just this is such a great question. I haven't been asked it before, so I'm even now just thinking through the answer of how, I think Ever grows up in Ohio, similar to me, and like Ever, she has friends of different races, and so that everything that she experiences, like part of her journey is just learning how to like understand her place in the world with all these different things happening, all these different types of relationships. Like she meets great, good people and she meets bad people and, everyone in between. And I think that's like just the reality of our world.
And with that series and with Kisses, Codes, and Conspiracies, I think it's really interesting also how you kind of deconstruct the trope and the stereotype of the overachieving Asian kid and give a little bit more of depth of understanding to that. How's that aspect of your work kind of received?
Yeah, thank you for asking. That was actually really important to me to talk about because there is this model minority myth in the United States that I grew up with that. But what I learned as I grew older, it had to do with discrimination at the borders. The only Asian Americans of that generation could only come because they were scholars. Like they came as grad students, they came as H-1B workers on visas. And so they are families that cared about education. And so that's why you see those types of Asian Americans like in prominent positions now. But there was a whole group of immigrants, Asian immigrants that came to work on the railroads. And for them, that was not the case. It wasn't, they didn't necessarily come from those families with that type of high academic expectation. So again, it's something I wanted to show. Like, I think when we understand the fuller picture, that helps us to understand like what this means. So, yeah, I think reading the book, my hope is that you will get like that more nuanced portrayal. Like, why is it that I meet so many Asian Americans who go to college, right? That I think hopefully that is something that people come away with a stronger understanding.
You mentioned that a lot of Ever's story is semi-autobiographical and based on your own experiences. Um, is that aspect of her story something that you experienced yourself as well?
So yes and no. My parents are actually pretty unusual immigrants from my generation. My dad was very poor. He came from Indonesia. He was 13 years old and he was sent the way the oldest son, his own father as the oldest son was sent from China to Indonesia to make a living for the family. And he had nothing. So I, heard stories of just how little he had to eat, how he had to like give food away. And but he was a self-made man. He really is the American dream. He went to high school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then he got into the University of Michigan and was a chemical engineer. Um, so I don't think his family necessarily had a high value on academics, but for him, it was a path that helped him to break out and succeed. My mom actually came from a family that was very anti-academic. Her father took his college money and started a business. He ran away from home to the Philippines, started a business, and it was a very successful one. And so their family actually kind of laughs at college degrees because it was not necessary for their success. But my mom herself was a teacher, so she came to America, studied education, and became a teacher. She was a school teacher for many years, and so for her, education was valuable. So I think my relationship to education isn't quite the same as the of many of my peers, but I definitely felt it in the community around me, and so that And also that expectation that ever feel that wanting to please her parents that ever feels. I definitely experienced that. Like I didn't want to let my family down. I didn't want to let the community down that expected so much of me when I secretly had these dreams of being something else.
So is writing your dance as far as
Writing is my dance. Yes, writing is my dance. You got it.
so we've got The Vale coming out September 16th and indie book tour and short film tour to go along with that, which we'll link on the blog. Once the dust settles from all that, what's next for you?
So it really is the veil. So with the short film, I'm writing the feature film script right now, and I'm having conversations with folks about that. But then I have another novel coming from HarperCollins. It's coming 2027. It's my first graphic novel. The Veil is actually an illustrated novel with 40 different illustrations. It's gorgeous. And the HarperCollins one is called The Fidget Booth. We just announced it, and that's being illustrated now by Maple Lamb, and I'm excited for that one.
That's great. Before we disconnect, is there anything else you want to say to our librarians that are watching this that are getting your books on their shelves?
Yeah, well, thank you again for all the work you're doing. The Veil, as I mentioned, comes out September 16th. There is a pre-order campaign for folks in your community. There are these adorable sticker sheets. And if you go to my website, you can find the link, or I think there's a link to this podcast too. But for every hardcover pre-order from an indie store, we'll send you one of these.
Fantastic. And yeah, we'll have a QR code here in just a moment that'll take you to that. And we'll also link your website and link your pre-order campaign in our blog post.
So yeah, but please come out and say hi, follow me on social media, sign up for the newsletter. I'd love to connect in person. And if there's a way I can do a talk at your library, I'd love to join you.
All right. Well, Abigail, we really appreciate you joining us on the Hub today. And good luck on September 16th with The Veil. And good luck with your indie book tour on that one.
Thank you so much, Justin, and thank you for the thoughtful questions.
Absolutely. I appreciate you joining us.